The three best things in my life are my kids. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else. Clear in a way that isn't just a disclaimer, a thing you say before you say the difficult thing to make it go down easier. I mean it completely. No regrets. No what ifs. They changed everything in ways I couldn't have predicted and wouldn't trade for anything. My 9-year-old is the one who convinced me to start this channel. He came to me a few months ago and said, "Dad, you talk about this stuff all the time. The philosophy, the finance, the way you think about building things. Why don't you just say it on camera?" And when I hesitated, he said, "I'll handle the gameplay. You handle the words. We do it together." That's the kind of person he is becoming. The kind who sees a problem and offers a solution. My 9-year-old is meticulous, careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. My 3-year-old still runs to the door when I come home. I am telling you this because everything I'm about to say needs to be heard inside that context. Not as a cautionary tale against family, not as a regret, but as the honest account of a man who loves his life and who still, clearly and without bitterness, can see the financial mistakes he made before it began. There's a financial reality that came with the decision to have children that nobody warned me about, that I wasn't prepared for, that 14 years later still creates friction, still limits certain options, still means that some decisions are harder than they need to be, not because the decision itself is complex, but because the financial foundation underneath it is thinner than it should be. And if you're in your 20s right now, or your early 30s, without children yet, or with one young child and more possibly coming, this video is specifically for you. Don't make my mistake. Not all of it. Not the parts that led to the people I love, but the financial parts. Those you can avoid. And I'm going to tell you exactly how. Let me be specific about what went wrong, because "I didn't save enough when I was young" is so generic that it's useless. Everyone's heard it. Nobody changes because of it. Here's what it actually looked like. I was in my 20s. I was working. Money was coming in. Not enormous amounts, but enough to live comfortably. Enough that there was always something left at the end of the month if I wanted there to be. The problem was that wanting there to be required a kind of forward-looking discipline that I simply hadn't developed. I wasn't reckless. I want to be clear about that because I think the common narrative about financial failure in youth, that it's about frivolous spending, about irresponsibility, about some character flaw, is both inaccurate and unhelpful. I wasn't buying yachts. I wasn't gambling away money. I wasn't making catastrophically bad decisions. I was just living, spending on the present, eating well, going out, investing in social experiences, the occasional purchase that felt justified at the time. Normal things. Things that millions of people my age were doing without apparent consequence. The consequence just came later. Because here's what I wasn't doing. I wasn't building anything for the future. No savings with any real intention behind them. No investments. No passive income. No deliberate accumulation of anything that would compound. I also made one large mistake in this period that cost me significantly. Not just money, but a friendship. I went into business with my best friend, a restaurant. We were both young, both convinced we understood the industry better than we did, both certain that our friendship and our passion would carry us through whatever difficulties arose. None of those things turned out to be sufficient. The business failed, and in the failure, things were said, positions were taken, blame was distributed, the way it always is when shared ventures collapse. The friendship didn't survive it. What I lost wasn't just the money I had put in, money I didn't have to lose, borrowed from the future essentially. I lost the relationship. And I lost about 2 years of emotional energy that went into processing the aftermath. And then, family. Not suddenly, not irresponsibly. but with a level of financial preparation that, looked at honestly now from the outside, was inadequate. My first child was born when I was relatively young. I was excited. I was ready emotionally. I was genuinely committed. Financially, I was starting from near zero. And here's what near zero financially with a child actually feels like. Every decision is heavier. That's the thing nobody tells you. It's not that you're always in crisis. Most months you manage, you figure it out, life continues. But the weight of every financial decision increases because the consequences of a mistake are no longer limited to yourself. When it's just you, you can recover from almost anything. Bad month? Tighten the budget for a few months and catch up. Bad year? Stressful, but navigable. When there are children, depending on what you do, the margin for error narrows significantly. The anxiety that comes with financial thinness isn't just about money, it's about responsibility. It's about looking at these people, these small, trusting, completely dependent people, and carrying the constant low level pressure of making sure their needs are met. That pressure is real. It doesn't destroy you, but it occupies space, mental space, emotional space, creative space, space that could be going somewhere else. And that's the cost I want to talk about. Not the dramatic financial catastrophe, not bankruptcy or crisis, just the chronic, low level weight of insufficient foundation meeting real responsibility. That weight cost you something over years, and it was entirely preventable. Before I get to the practical things, what to build, how to build it, I want to spend some time on something that I think is the actual root problem. Why don't people build financial foundations when they're young? The obvious answer is they don't have enough money. And for some people, genuinely, that's true. If you're working minimum wage in an expensive city and your income barely covers your expenses, the advice to save more is both technically correct and practically useless. But for many people, maybe most of the people watching this, that's not the real reason. The real reason is psychological, and it operates mostly below the level of conscious thought. Here's what I mean. Thinking seriously about money, about your actual financial situation, about where you are relative to where you need to be, about the gap between your current trajectory and a secure future, is uncomfortable. Deeply uncomfortable. Not just mildly unpleasant. For many people, genuinely confronting their financial reality produces something close to dread. A tightening, a desire to look away, to think about something else, to tell yourself it will work out without actually examining whether it will. And so, most people don't look. They maintain a vague, optimistic sense of their financial situation that is much more comfortable than an accurate one. They know roughly how much they earn. They have a loose sense of their major expenses. They feel, in a general way, like they're probably okay, or that they will be okay, or that there's time to figure it out later. This is not irresponsibility. This is the very human tendency to avoid uncomfortable information. We do it with our health too. We don't go to the doctor when something worries us because the appointment might produce information we don't want to have. As if not knowing were the same as not having the problem. With money, it works the same way. Not examining your financial situation too closely maintains the possibility that it's fine. Examining it closely risks confirming that it isn't. And so we don't examine it closely. We tell ourselves, I'll sort this out properly when I'm earning more, when I'm more settled, when things slow down, when I have time to sit down and really think about it. Those moments rarely arrive, because life has a way of maintaining its pace regardless of your intentions. And the financial foundation you are planning to build later remains unbuilt. And later becomes the present, and then it's now. And you have children and responsibilities, and the margin for starting from scratch is much narrower. Seneca wrote, Non differtur vita transcurrit. Life is not postponed, it passes. He was writing about existence in general, about the tendency to live as if the important things can wait until later. But he might as well have been writing specifically about financial planning, because the conversation you're avoiding with yourself about your actual financial situation, about what you need to build and by when, that conversation will happen eventually. Either you initiate it from a position of choice with time on your side, or life initiates it for you from a position of necessity with less margin. Both conversations cover the same territory. The timing is the only thing in your control. There's another psychological mechanism worth naming here, because I see it constantly and I've been inside it myself. It's what behavioral economists call present bias. The research on this is extensive, but the basic finding is simple. Human beings systematically overvalue things available now relative to things available in the future. We discount the future at a rate much higher than is rationally justified. A concrete example. Many studies show that people will choose $100 today over $120 in a month. But those same people, when asked whether they'd prefer $100 in 12 months or $120 in 13 months, choose the $120. Same ratio, same 1 month gap, but moved into the future, they make the patient choice. This is not stupidity, it's wiring. Our brains evolved in environments where the future was deeply uncertain. An animal or a human who passed up available resources now in favor of future resources often didn't survive to collect the future resources. So the brain developed a strong preference for the immediate. That wiring was adaptive for most of human history. In the modern financial context, where the future is relatively predictable, where compound interest rewards patience enormously, where the costs of decisions accumulate over decades, that wiring actively works against us. The sacrifice required to save and invest when you're young feels immediate and real. Skipping the dinner out, not buying the new thing, putting money into an account where it feels locked away and inactive. These costs are felt now. The benefit, financial security, options, the feeling of margin that comes from having a foundation, is abstract, distant, and uncertain feeling. The brain naturally weights the immediate cost more heavily than the distant benefit. This is the actual enemy, not lack of discipline, not character failure, just neurons doing what they evolved to do in a context for which they weren't designed. Understanding this changes the strategy, because if the problem is a bias toward the present, then the solution isn't to simply try harder to care about the future. The solution is to make the future feel more present. Concretely, visualize in specific detail what your life looks like in 10 years with and without the financial foundation you could build now. Not vaguely, specifically. Where are you living? What decisions are you making from strength versus desperation? What options do you have? That specificity makes the future more real. And when the future is more real, the present sacrifice becomes easier to make. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. I want to start there because it matters to his credibility on this subject. He wasn't a philosopher advising on money from a position of poverty. He was enormously rich through his position as an advisor to Nero, through land and investments, through the kind of accumulated wealth that came with being at the center of Roman power. And his writing about money is among the most honest and most useful I've encountered anywhere. He wrote hundreds of letters to his friend Lucilius that collectively form one of the great works of practical philosophy, and money runs through them constantly, not as the point, but as an inescapable part of life that demands honest reckoning. His most famous line on the subject: "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the man who hankers after more." This is usually quoted as an argument against materialism, and it is that. But it's also something more specific and more useful. He's pointing at the internal state that money either produces or fails to produce. Two men have the same amount. One is satisfied, not complacent, not passive, but genuinely at peace with his situation, building steadily, present in his life. The other is constantly comparing, constantly aware of what he doesn't have, constantly reaching for more, as if the next acquisition will provide the peace the current one didn't. The second man, regardless of his objective wealth level, is poor, because he is enslaved to desire, because his internal state is determined by the gap between what he has and what he wants, rather than by what he actually values. This is not an argument against wanting more. Seneca himself was ambitious, accumulative, successful. It's an argument for wanting more of the right things, for being clear about what you're actually building toward and why. Because he saw clearly, living inside enormous wealth, that money itself is neutral. It doesn't produce peace. It doesn't produce satisfaction. It doesn't, by itself, produce the good life. What it can produce is optionality, the ability to say no to things that don't serve you, the ability to wait for the right opportunity rather than taking whatever comes because you need it, the ability to make decisions from a position of choice rather than necessity. That is what Seneca valued about wealth, not the accumulation itself, the freedom it created, the options it kept open. Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is borrowed. Time alone is ours. This is from the very first letter he wrote to Lucilius, and it's the frame within which everything else should be understood. Because the real scarcity isn't money, it's time. The money you accumulate in your 20s, properly deployed, buys you time in your 40s, buys you the ability to be present for your children instead of anxious about bills, buys you the ability to make career decisions based on what actually matters to you rather than what pays fastest, buys you the right to say no to things that would cost you something real. Every day you fail to build a foundation, you are not just failing to accumulate wealth, you are failing to buy future time. And future time, like all finite things, becomes more expensive as it becomes more scarce. I want to connect Seneca's thinking to something contemporary that I think illuminates it clearly. Morgan Housel, in The Psychology of Money, makes a point that I've found more useful than almost anything else I've read on this subject. He says, the highest dividend money pays is control over your time. Not the things you can buy, not the status it confers, the control. The ability to wake up on a Monday and decide how to spend the day based on what matters to you, rather than what someone else requires. The ability to slow down when your health demands it, to be present when your family needs you, to pursue something uncertain because you have enough stability underneath to take the risk. He describes meeting people with enormous wealth who were deeply unhappy, still enslaved to their own anxiety, still unable to feel secure, still chasing more. And people with relatively modest resources who felt genuinely free, because they had built their life around a small number of things that mattered to them and arranged their finances to support those things. The variable that separated them wasn't the number, it was the relationship to the number. Seneca would recognize this immediately. The person with plenty who hankers for more is poor. The person with enough who understands what enough means and has built a life around that understanding is free. And building toward that freedom is most powerful when it starts early, before responsibility multiplies, before the margin narrows, before the decisions start landing on people who didn't choose to bear their consequences. That's the window I'm talking about. Your 20s and early 30s, before family, before the full weight of adult responsibility. Use it. Let me give you the actual numbers, not general principles, specific math. Because I think the problem with most financial advice is that it stays at the principle level. Spend less than you earn, invest early, avoid debt, and doesn't connect to the lived reality that makes those principles feel abstract. Here's the lived reality. A person who starts investing at 22 and puts away a modest amount each month, let's say something achievable, something that requires discipline but is an extraordinary sacrifice, for 8 years, then stops completely and never invests another dollar. That person at retirement age will have more money than someone who starts at 30 and invests the same amount every month for 30 years. That's not a typo. 8 years of early investing, then nothing, beats 30 years of late investing when the numbers are held equal. Why? Compound interest, time in the market, the math of exponential growth. The money you invest at 22 has 40 plus years to grow. The money you invest at 30 has 30 plus years. 10 years of compounding at reasonable market returns is not a small difference. It is enormous. This is the thing that genuinely doesn't feel real until you run the numbers. We understand linear growth intuitively. You add a dollar, you have one more dollar. We don't intuitively understand exponential growth. The way small amounts, properly compounded, become large amounts. The way time, specifically early time, is the most valuable ingredient in the whole system. Now apply this to the decision to not invest in your 20s because other things felt more pressing. Every year you delay is not just a year without growth. It's a year removed from the most powerful end of the compounding curve. The early years are worth more than the later years. Much more. I'm not saying this to produce guilt. I'm saying it because understanding this changes how you frame the decision. It's not, should I invest $200 a month in my 20s versus, should I spend $200 a month on things I enjoy? It's, what is the actual value of $200 a month invested at 22 versus invested at 32? When you run that number, the choice looks different. Now, let me talk about the indirect costs of family without a foundation, because I think this is where people most underestimate the impact. Direct costs of children are obvious: food, clothing, healthcare, education, childcare when they're young, everything that accumulates when you're responsible for a small human being. These costs are significant and they don't decrease quickly. They evolve, but they don't disappear. A teenager is not cheap. A young adult who needs support is not cheap. But the indirect costs are where the real financial impact lives. Your risk tolerance changes completely. When it's just you, risk is something you can engage with relatively freely. Take the lower paying job that teaches you more. Start the business that might fail. Move to the city where the opportunity is. These risks are real, but their downside is largely your own to absorb. When there are children, the downside of any significant risk lands on people who didn't choose to take it. And you feel that. In your body, in your decision making, in the subtle self-censorship that happens when you're about to do something bold and you think, but what if it doesn't work? This is not weakness. This is love. It is also, when driven by financial thinness rather than genuine assessment, a constraint on your potential. Your career flexibility narrows. Because the job that pays reliably, even if it drains you, becomes harder to leave when payroll means children's needs are met. The pivot you've been thinking about, the retraining, the business, the creative work, stays in the someday category because the immediate financial pressure doesn't allow for the transition period that any major change requires. Your cognitive load increases. This is the one that surprises people most when they encounter it. Financial anxiety is cognitively expensive. When money is tight, when you're aware, constantly at the back of your mind, that there isn't much margin, a portion of your cognitive processing is perpetually occupied with that awareness. Research on this is striking. People experiencing financial scarcity show measurable decreases in cognitive performance, not because they're less intelligent, but because mental bandwidth is genuinely finite, and anxiety occupies a portion of it constantly. The things you could be thinking about: creative work, relationships, long-term planning, genuine rest, compete with the background hum of financial worry. Build the foundation before the family, and that hum is quieter. Not absent. Life always provides things to worry about, but quieter. And the difference in daily experience is significant. I want to make this as concrete as I possibly can, because build a financial foundation is not an action, it's a category. And categories don't get done, specific actions get done. So here's what I would do, specifically, if I could go back. First, I would have one clear, honest conversation with myself about my actual financial situation. Not a vague sense of it, an actual accounting. How much comes in each month? How much goes out? Where it goes, specifically, not generally. And the gap between current trajectory and the trajectory I would need to be on to have genuine options in 10 years. This conversation is uncomfortable. That's precisely why most people avoid it. But it is the prerequisite for everything else. You cannot build toward a goal you haven't clearly defined. You cannot close a gap you haven't honestly measured. One conversation, on paper, honest numbers. Second, I would eliminate consumer debt first, before anything else. Not because debt is morally wrong, not because it's shameful, but because it is mechanically destructive to wealth building. Consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, buy now, pay later, carries interest rates that dwarf anything a reasonable investment will return. Paying off a credit card at 20% interest is a guaranteed 20% return. No investment provides that reliably. Every month you carry consumer debt, a portion of your income is flowing backward, to the past, to previous consumption, to things you've already used up. That portion is not available to flow forward. Clear the debt. Then the income that was servicing it becomes available for building. Third, I would build an emergency fund before starting to invest. 3 months of real expenses, not 3 months of bare survival. 3 months of your actual life. Rent, food, transportation, the things you actually spend. Sitting in something accessible, not invested in the market where it can drop 30% right when you need it. This feels like a passive, uninspiring use of money. It is. It's also the thing that stands between a difficult period and a catastrophic one. Because life breaks, unexpectedly and without regard for your plans. The car needs a major repair. A medical issue produces unexpected costs. A job changes. A family situation requires resources. The person with 3 months of expenses saved converts these events from crises to inconveniences. The person without that buffer converts them into emergency debt. And emergency debt compounds the underlying problem rather than addressing it. Fourth, I would start investing whatever I could immediately without waiting for the amount to feel significant. Because the amount at this stage is almost beside the point. The habit is the point. The time in the market is the point. The automatic, consistent, regardless of how you feel this month, contribution to something that grows is the point. Start with whatever you can start with. The psychological effect of being a person who invests, even a small amount, is real. It changes how you think about money. It makes the future feel more connected to the present. Seneca, begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life. He was writing about existence, but the principle applies precisely here. Begin at once. Not when you have enough. Not when you understand it better. Not when things settle down. Now. Fifth, I would build one income stream that doesn't require my direct presence. One, not 5, not a complex side hustle empire. One thing that produces value when I'm not actively working on it. This could be an investment portfolio that generates returns. It could be a piece of content, a blog, a YouTube channel, something digital that continues to earn after the initial work is done. It could be a skill that can be productized into something scalable. A single income is fragile in a way that becomes clear only when it disappears. The person who earns from one source is one event away from zero. The person who earns from two sources, even if the second is much smaller, has fundamentally changed their vulnerability profile. Start building the second one while the first is functioning. Sixth, stay cheap longer than feels comfortable or necessary. This is the hardest one psychologically because lifestyle inflation is invisible while it's happening. Your income increases, your spending increases to match. This feels natural. You're earning more, you can afford more, you deserve more. The consumption is not dramatic, it's gradual. A nicer apartment, a newer car, more meals out, a subscription here, a purchase there. And nothing wrong with any of it exactly, except that the gap, the space between what you earn and what you spend, is where wealth lives. And lifestyle inflation closes that gap automatically, invisibly, continuously. In your 20s, the social context is forgiving. Living with roommates is normal. Driving an old car is normal. Spending Friday night in rather than out is acceptable. The identity of building, not spending, is available to you without significant social cost. That window closes. Not suddenly, but it closes. The expectations, self-imposed and social, shift. Use the window. The rental apartment with the uncomfortable kitchen. The used car that runs fine. The clothes that are good enough. These things do not define your life, and the gap they create, properly deployed, eventually does. I want to say something clearly before I close, because I've been talking a lot about building and accumulating and preparing. And I don't want the impression left by this video to be the point of life is financial optimization. It isn't. Seneca, who was extraordinarily wealthy, was also clear about this. He spent his last years trying to reduce his exposure to wealth, not expand it. He wrote about the peace that comes from needing less, from being genuinely satisfied rather than perpetually reaching. The goal is not to have more. The goal is optionality, the ability to choose. That's a meaningful distinction. I'm not building toward some number. I'm building toward the ability to make decisions from a position of choice rather than necessity. To say yes to things that matter because I have enough. To say no to things that drain me because I'm not desperate. And critically, the building itself should not consume the life it's supposed to protect. I see this trap clearly. The person who is so focused on financial preparation that they miss the years they were preparing for, who sacrifices presence now for security later and arrives at later to find the presence has already passed. Your children are young now. That is not a permanent condition. The 3-year-old runs to the door now. In 5 years, he will not run. In 10 years, the dynamic will be entirely different and, while perhaps richer in other ways, will not contain this specific thing. Build, prepare, take the long view, do the boring financial work, and also be here. Be present with what's actually happening in your life right now, because the financial foundation you're building is in service of a life, not a replacement for it. Seneca again, from a different letter. Recede inte ipse, retire into yourself. He meant, stop looking outward constantly for the validation and the comparison and the metrics. Return to what's actually real, to the people in front of you, to the life you're already living. The financial work and the presence work are not opposites. They support each other. A person with a stable foundation is more free to be present. And the person who is genuinely present, who values the life they have rather than anxiously comparing it to some imagined better version, makes better financial decisions because they're not trying to buy peace with consumption. Build the foundation, it matters. And then use it to live well, not just to accumulate more. My kids are the best thing in my life, completely, without reservation. But they deserve a father who isn't making decisions from financial pressure, who has real options, who chose this life fully, with his eyes open, with a foundation to support it, rather than arrived in it underprepared. That father, I'm building him now, 14 years later than ideal, with the tools and understanding I wish I'd had at 22. You don't have to wait that long. Have the honest conversation with yourself about where you actually are. Clear the debt. Build a buffer. Start investing whatever you can, now. Build one thing that grows without your constant presence. Stay cheap until it would actually cost you something real to do so. These are not exciting instructions. They are not going to generate a rush of motivation. They are boring and consistent, and they require showing up when you don't feel like it. But they compound. And the person you'll be in 10 years, the options you'll have, the decisions you'll make from strength rather than necessity, the presence you'll bring to the people you love because you're not carrying a constant weight of financial anxiety. That person is built now, in the decisions nobody sees, in the discipline that feels pointless, until suddenly it doesn't. Leave a comment. Where are you financially right now? Before kids? After? Somewhere in the middle? No judgment. No advice unless you want it. Just honest conversation. I read everything. See you in the next one.